So it's actually happening. Logan Paul is fighting Floyd Mayweather Jr. on June 6th in an exhibition bout on Showtime pay-per-view. It was supposed to happen earlier this year, back in February, but it was rescheduled due to a lack of interest. There was a press conference, a stare-down, and Jake Paul got punched in the face for stealing a hat, and now he's banned from attending the fight. I don't know if anyone became an avid boxing fan through these YouTube fights, but if anyone did, I won't judge them too harshly. I'm neutral on the matter. We all start somewhere. I mean, the anime that got me into other anime was Sword Art Online. Before that, it was just old school shonen, like Dragon Ball, Naruto, and Bleach. So it's fine, I understand. It's just that, for anyone who's actually interested in learning about the sport, I'd like to give a proper introduction and a warm welcome to the sweet science. This is how to start watching boxing.
Hands are down for Estrada. He's welcoming these punches so he can counter. But right now, it's Chocolatino on the front foot.
Flatfoot seems like he wants to.
Left hand sends the kid down. Eddie Reynoso saying to Ryan Garcia, "You're young." Body shot, and he goes down.
And you see the body language from Valdez.
Uppercut combination, and he scores the knockdown. Oh my!
Before I can begin with recommendations, we need to cover some basic ground rules. Contrary to what some compensating men might say, size matters. Styles make fights, and skill is the most important factor when it comes to fighting. But when the skill between two fighters are comparable, size is the next biggest factor, and it's for this reason weight classes exist. You may already be familiar with some of the more famous weight classes like lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and most famously, heavyweight. But there are more weight classes than you think. In today's sport of boxing, there are a total of 17 weight classes. 18 if you ask some, but we don't talk about that. And each of these weight classes have their own champions. Speaking of which, well, what does it mean to be a world champion? It seems simple enough. Defeat the champion, take their belt, and defend it, right? Well, yes and no. We are currently in the 4-belt era, which means what you may think of as the world champion, it's actually fractured between 4 main sanctioning bodies: the WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO. Each of these sanctioning bodies have their own rankings, can crown their own champions, and some of them even have unique rules. Now, a unified champion is when a boxer possesses 2 or more of these titles that are recognized, and an undisputed champion is when they possess all 4 at the same time. This is the highest honor that a fighter can have, and it's definitive proof that they are the best of the best. Other smaller sanctioning bodies exist, but those don't matter. Okay, so there can be up to 4 different champions at a weight class, right? Well, not exactly. Other world titles can exist, aside from the major ones. Interims. Once a year, a sanctioning body orders their champion to fight a mandatory challenger, and it's usually whoever's ranked number 1. Usually. In the event in which a champion is unable to fulfill their mandatory challenger, rather than stripping the champion of their status, they can have the mandatory challenger fight another challenger in order to be crowned the interim champion, further cementing their mandatory status. If the full champion does not return to fight the interim champion, they can be stripped and the interim champion will be promoted as the full champion. Or at least that's how it's supposed to work. Lineal champions and Ring Magazine champions. They're not actual titles, but they are respected as ones. Whenever you see them, it's proof that the consensus number 1 and number 2 fighters have fought each other, and thus they are considered the best in the division. Regular champions. It's a cash grab. Whenever a champion defends their world title, they have to pay a sanctioning fee. More belts, more fees. Franchise champions. No one likes it, nobody understands, not even the guy who made it up. It's just something that we're stuck with in the meantime. In an ideal world, there would be 17 champions. 1 undisputed, lineal, and Ring Magazine champion per weight class. But since we don't live in an ideal world, and there could be up to 12 different champions per weight class, theoretically, there could be up to 204 different world champions. As of May 22nd, 2021, there are a total of 76 world champions right now. So maybe we don't live in the worst timeline. The takeaway of this section is that only these titles matter. This is a rather complicated matter. Just know that if these boxers want to make some good money and get some exposure, they typically have to sign with a promotion and fight on whatever network they might be contracted to. Top Rank, BBC, Golden Boy, Matchroom, Queensberry. There's a lot of names that are out there. If you're ever wondering why two fighters might not be fighting each other, well, they might just belong to two different promotions who just don't like each other. There might be some issues regarding who gets the rights to broadcast the fight, where the fight happens, who gets paid how much, and sometimes they don't even bother to negotiate with each other. It could go to a purse bid, which is kind of like an auction, but you never know who might put up the most money. There's a lot of names to keep track of across many weight classes, and they can't all fight each other. So, where do you start? How do you start watching boxing? Take it one person at a time. Even somebody like me, who looks at all the rankings on a weekly basis, can have a hard time keeping track of everything. If you're here because of YouTubers, then you might want to check out some of the guys that they collabed with. The Paul brothers hung out with Ryan Garcia. I remember KSI doing a bit with Anthony Joshua. Or you might even be familiar with Canelo Alvarez because of this.
It's something, I think it's one of my best moments in my, one of my best moments.
Other than that, here's what I recommend. Take a look at some top 10 pound for pound lists and see who's on them. It doesn't necessarily matter how they're ranked, because even the veteran viewers disagree how they should be ranked, much less who even deserves to be on them. So pick any fighter you want, and watch their highlight reels on YouTube. If you like what you see, then try watching their whole fights, and practice scoring them. This guy did a wonderful video on how to score fights, by the way. If you still like this fighter in particular, then figure out who else is in their weight class, and try checking them out. Watch, rinse, repeat, and you can spread out from there. So I got sucked into boxing through the massive hype train that was Mayweather vs. Pacquiao. Before that point, I didn't care much for sports, or fighting, aside from some fight choreography, but it's just fiction with some varying degrees of realism. I figured I wanted a taste of the real thing, and so I watched a bunch of technical breakdowns to familiarize myself with their styles. In terms of entertainment value, it wasn't all that exciting, but it is what it is. After that, I became a casual, watching the sport on again and off again. As I was more of a UFC guy at the time, I watched Mayweather vs. Berto, and Pacquiao vs. Horn. Not the worst thing to happen in Australia, but not the worst thing to happen in Australia since then.
Strike! 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 You're out!
But if I were to tell you which fights got me into the sport, I'd have to say Canelo vs. Golovkin and Lomachenko vs. Rigondeaux. Canelo vs. Triple G? It's just a fun fight with some back and forth action. I disagree with the scorecards though, but it's a modern classic, and the rematch was a whole lot closer. As for Loma and Rigo, one day I was recommended a highlight reel of Lomachenko beating up Gary Russell Jr. on YouTube, and I found his style very aesthetically pleasing. And when I looked him up, he had a fight booked against Guillermo Rigondeaux. Both two-time Olympic gold medalists, both have relatively short professional careers. I remember some people trying to make it a race war, but on the night of the fight, nope. Nope. Nope.
That's it. He is saying I don't want any more. God. Are you kidding me?
By the end of 2017, I became a regular. I have to thank YouTube for getting me into boxing. Maybe one day, there will be a balance between YouTube and traditional boxing. Till then, my name is On, and I'm off.